Beck and welcome to the book recommendation tag. There are 15 prompts on this tag, so I'm going to jump straight into the first one, which is a book that you tell people is your favourite book. The Art of Racing in the Rain by Garth Stein, which is a fiction told from the perspective of a dog. And while it does have humour in it, it very much focuses on the intensity of family relationships, which is why I really love and appreciate this. I tend to love books that have so much character pushed into them, and this was just bursting at the seams with character and just passion and love and reflection, and that's why it's one of my favourites. I don't just say it's my favourite, it definitely is also one of my favourites. I also am sorry if the sun keeps going in and out, but it's supposed to be autumn, and in Melbourne especially, which is where I'm from, the weather literally changes in 5 minutes, so we're just going to have to put up with the constant shifting of the light. But the second question is a book that is your guilty pleasure. And this one for me was hard to think about because I don't really discern whether something is a guilty pleasure or not. I guess people would put smut books in this section. I don't know. Everyone reads different things, so I'm not really ashamed of what I read. So I would say the Dresden Files, not that this is smut, obviously. This is a urban fantasy series and it follows a wizard detective in Chicago. This is a pivotal book that I'm holding up. I think it's book 11 or 12 in the series. I love this series, but it has a lot of pushback from certain people because of the way that Dresden is portrayed. There is definitely a male gaze in there, but Dresden is also a young man, so to a certain extent it makes sense, but everyone kind of has their line on what they can put up with. I definitely notice it, but because of the tone of voice and also the bursting character in here, it really just lets me sink into the storytelling in this book. In another series, it might be the thing to repel me, but in Dresden, it doesn't bother me as much as it necessarily could. So that's why I'm putting this on my guilty pleasure list, I guess, because either people love this or they hate it, but I really love it. I'm also way behind in reading the series because I just completely and utterly stalled on it. So I'm hoping to pick it up again, but it really just depends on Dave. And there's been a few things going on recently that I will talk to you about after we've had our wedding. So put a pin in that. I will definitely do some reading vlogs, but hopefully Dresden will be continued, but to be confirmed. Number 3 is a book that everyone loved but you didn't, and straight off the bat I can tell you Sword of Kaigen, which is probably listed in my worst books of 2022 video, and there are a few other titles in my books I did not finish in 2022 video that are going to show up for this question. One of those is Senlin Ascends. I don't understand the hype for them. They just weren't my cup of tea. And then the other two answers for this question that I've got are books that I did finish, surprisingly, but they're not books that I necessarily loved and that I agree with all of the hype for. So one of those would be Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. I liked the style it was going for, but I didn't feel any need to continue on to the sequel. And then I've got Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, which is a book that I did enjoy, but everyone gives it 5 stars and they rave about it, and I don't find it raveable, I guess. I gave it 3.5 stars. I did enjoy it, but I felt like it was too long and could have been split into 2 books and then told the story that way more succinctly, because it felt like very long-winded, slow-paced all across the book, and then the ending happened very quickly. And I think if it was split, that would have been avoided, but I am just one opinion in the sea of bookish opinions here. Next is a book you read the fastest, and for obvious reasons I'm going to say Fence, because not only of its length but also because of my enjoyment. I completely devoured this, and I am in the process of adding a whole bunch of books to my cart so that I can buy some more in this series, because it is one that I really want to continue very, very soon, and it's my birthday in May, so I'm going to treat myself to a hopefully big book haul if I can afford to, and include more volumes in this. Question 5 is a book that deserves more hype, and I will rant and rave about this book so that everyone picks it up, and that is The Book of the Unnamed Midwife. And this is probably the best post-apocalyptic story that I have ever read. It doesn't have zombies in it. If it did have zombies, it would be like my favorite book of all time. But this is about obviously a midwife after a massive pandemic destroys 99.9% of the population globally. And so she is trying to convince everybody who sees her that she is a man. So she takes on like male persona and the way of dressing and addressing people and everything, so that she can survive and help all of the women that she comes across, because men had a more likelihood of surviving, whereas women didn't. So there are even less women in the world. And so because this is a woman trying to protect other women in a post-apocalyptic world, obviously you're going to expect like gratuitous violence and SA and everything. And while those things are discussed, it doesn't drill down into them in absolutely explicit gory detail. And so it recognizes the traumas of people without giving you like the graphic blow by blow of the scene. Like, this is exactly what the character is suffering right at this moment, and there is no saving grace for them because this is the apocalypse. I think this was a really smart telling of a story that could have gone really dark, but it became really introspective and quite intriguing in terms of the human psyche, and I really appreciated that. It was also incredibly queer positive, and I know that the author is trans, so that probably had a lot to do with it. This does have 2 companion books after this book, and this book kind of becomes a legend to the other 2, so it doesn't follow characters directly from this book, but it references events that happened in here. So the 2 characters that it follows in the future are both trans. So it's really cool that we get to see that development, not only of the world, but also of the legacy that is set up in here. So I just loved it. I loved it so much, and I want more people to read it because post-apocalyptic books have become absolutely massive recently, especially with the release of The Last of Us, and this is barely discussed at all. It needs to be read more. Question 6 is a book that is becoming a movie or TV show, and obviously I'm going to say Heartstopper Season 2 for this question, but I have 2 other things I'd like to discuss as well. And those things are Red, White and Royal Blue, because this has wrapped filming, I believe. It's in post-production, but we do not have a release date yet. When I looked it up, it said it was releasing on Amazon Prime, but Australia gets things differently to everywhere else. So if it's going to be on Amazon, Stan, Netflix, whatever streaming service, I am eager to watch it. I think it's a film, which I'm very excited for. I need to reread this in the meantime. And then I've got another book here that I haven't even hauled yet, so you're getting the first look, and it is The Power. And this, I believe, is like if The Handmaid's Tale and X-Men were crossed over. It follows women, I think, who have supernatural abilities and they are oppressed because men want control over them. That is what I've roughly gotten from the blurb, and that is a very like abrasive way to describe this book, but I think those are the themes it's generally going for, and hopefully I can read it before the film because I'm not sure if the film has a release date yet. I'm pretty sure it's a film and not a series. I only recently saw this on an adaptations list that I googled like 15 minutes ago because I wanted additional books for this question. Question 7 is a book that you have reread the most, and I've reread a few things only like a handful of times. I want to get more into rereading though. I'd say The Way of Kings is a book that I've reread quite a bit. Given its length, I'm quite impressed. Obviously Harry Potter I reread to the point where I can't remember the amount of times I've reread it because I reread it throughout my entire childhood. And then recently I've also reread Saga a few times because there was a massive hiatus between the volumes 10 and 11. So I've reread this every time a new volume has come out. So naturally, because this is volume 1, I reread it most. So I think Saga would count here. Question 8 is a book from a genre that you don't typically read, and I surprisingly really loved this book, and it's Beyond the Wand by Tom Felton. This is his memoir about growing up as a child actor, and I read this as an audiobook, so because he narrates it, it added that extra facet to it. It felt like I was just sitting across from him in a cafe, like having a cup of tea, and he was telling me his story. So it made it very relatable and personable. He translated everything from his history. It was very cleverly written, I think, and the way that he discussed the different themes in here, obviously there is a nostalgia element too, because like I said, I loved Harry Potter when I was growing up, but this did touch on that because obviously it was a massive part of his childhood, but it also discussed child fame and kind of parasocial relationships in a way, because people would assume that he was Draco Malfoy when he was Tom Felton. And so you got that kind of cognitive dissonance and that psychological analyzing throughout the story and how he had struggled with different parts of his life because of that. And it was just really eye-opening because of the tone and the humor and the gravity of the book. I ended up giving it 5 stars. And it's a non-fiction, and I don't reach for non-fiction usually, but this one was kind of an outlier and I'm really glad that I read it. Then question 9 is a book that deserves all the hype it gets, and I am 100% on board with the Leah Bardugo bandwagon because I loved Hellbent, and if you haven't read them yet, 9th House and Hellbent are dark academia books that are kind of ritualistic in their grotesque version of magic, and our main character Alex can see greys or ghosts, and this is a very rare ability, so combine all of that up together with responsibility and secret societies, you're in for a delightful time. Well, I wouldn't say delightful, but like dark. It's very, again, gratuitous with its violence, but it's well worth reading because obviously this is an adult series by Leigh Bardugo, so she's not going to pull any punches when it comes to writing in this category, which I really enjoyed. It had a great depth to it, and I really love the complexity of the characters. All of them, all of the characters in here. The next question is a book that you usually recommend when you are asked for a recommendation, and let's go with a classic, right? The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. While this seems to be a very complex adult fantasy work, it's actually written in a very easily to digest way. So Brandon's writing has been described as simple, but I think that's one of its strengths. It's not simple in terms of content, it's simple in terms of diluting what he's intending to say and easily communicating that to the reader. And because he does that, his world building, his characters and their motivations and goals are really easy to understand, despite everything in here literally being alien because it is an entirely new created fantasy world. So I would highly recommend The Final Empire because of that, but also because yes, it is the first book in a trilogy, but if you don't want to get overwhelmed with fantasy books, it actually wraps itself up quite well just in one book. And then if you like that and you're interested in the genre of fantasy, you have the option of continuing. So I think this is a really cleverly written book, even though it is arguably simple. I think it's great, and I have reread it several times as well. So I tried to avoid using it on the reread question so I could use it on this one instead. Question 11 is a book that has your favourite character, and instead of saying Way of Kings again with Kaladin, I decided to go for Legends and Lattes. I don't want to spoil exactly who it is, but there is someone who makes cinnamon scrolls in here, and I just love them with my entire heart and soul. This is a cozy fantasy book, so if you want to snuggle up and read it, I would recommend having a tea or coffee and a baked good of some kind, because this will absolutely make you hungry. It is a very wholesome story about an orc who doesn't want to kill anymore, wants to kind of retire her axe and go into creating this coffee shop in a city that nobody knows what coffee is. So it just chronicles her finding all of her suppliers and accidentally creating this lovely found family dynamic. It's just a beautiful story. And again, I cannot wait to reread this as well. And the prequel comes out at the end of the year in November, Bookshops and Bone Dust, I think, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on that too. Question 12 is a book world that you want to live in. The only one I can think of that's not even a book world is Ted Lasso. Like, send me to London, please. All of the books that I read are fantasy. I don't want to live in a world other than mine. Like, I would be that extra character that's in the tavern when the main characters blow it up. Like, I don't want to do that. I'd rather just go to London. Then question 13 is a book that you thought you'd hate but you ended up loving. Now, the caveat is that I haven't actually read and finished this book cover to cover, but I did read the first chapter and I thought that this would alienate me because it's in a genre that I don't usually reach for, and that is A Man Called Ove. And because this is like a fiction, a literary fiction, I thought I wouldn't like it, but the tone of voice for Ove and how grumpy of an old man he is just trying to do the simplest of tasks makes me think that I'm really going to enjoy this discussion and this plot. So I think that this is a book that I thought that I would dislike because I bought it without really understanding what it was about, but now that I've actually sampled a bit of it, I'm like, I think I could really love this book. Would it be at least a 4 stars, maybe even a 5, depending. So I think this is going to also make me cry, and I'm trying not to think about it. Now we are down to the final 2 questions. Number 14 is a book that made you cry, and I haven't actually had one of those this year, which is sad in and of itself. And then we've got the final one, question 15, which is a book that you wish you could read for the first time. Silver Under Nightfall. Am I that predictable? Yes. Again, this was in my best books of 2022. Like, of course it was going to be one of the books that I wanted to read as if I had never read it before. I'm going to reread this anyway, but you always remember bits and pieces about what you've already read before. So I know how this ends. I know what the characters are doing, but I don't care because this is such a brilliant book. That is the end of this massive book recommendations tag. Thank you so much for watching this far in the video. Leave me some like dagger emojis or something because of the sword on Silver Under Nightfall. But thank you again so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.